It is time for me to make my 2023 MLS predictions, and we shall find out if my predictions come true and if your team will bring you the happiness of making the MLS Cup playoffs or even winning the MLS Supporter Shield, or it will just be another year of pain. So let's find out. So with that, let's get started with the Western Conference. In 14th place, I have the new expansion team, St. Louis. And I mean, does it really come as a surprise that they're probably going to finish in last place? I mean, all you got to do is just look at their roster. Outside of bringing in Swiss goalkeeper Roman Berkey, the team looks quite terrible. Then for the spots between 13th to 10th, I believe they're interchangeable, but this is who I decided to go with. In 13th place, I went with the San Jose Earthquakes. I still feel like there's a lot of uncertainty with this team, and I haven't felt like they've made the right signings and additions to really push themselves into a playoff caliber team, but I will say they have a bunch of really young and talented players that maybe come a season or two will be leaders within this team. In 12th, I have the Vancouver Whitecaps. The reason I have them so low is because they are playing in the CONCACAF Champions League, and I think they're going to make a decent run in this year's competition, which will be kind of taxing for this squad that doesn't have much depth, so that's why I put them lower in the standing. The next up in 11th place is the Houston Dynamo, where I feel like I could be totally proven wrong with putting them in this position. I feel this team actually has a really good gel of experience and young talent, but they don't really have that one budding superstar that can really carry this team into the playoffs. But I'm excited to see a full season of what Hector Herrera can do with this Houston Dynamo team. The next up is Minnesota United, where most people would put them a lot lower in this year's standings because of what's going on with Emmanuel Reynoso. And if you're not in the loop and not really sure what's going on with Emmanuel Reynoso, I'm not sure either. The whole situation is fairly confusing as there's so many different reports talking about him and what's going on, what's true, what's not true. The main facts are he's not back with Minnesota United and most likely won't be back with them for a while. And that's gonna hurt this team quite a bit. Minnesota United's defense is usually always the staple of the team, which helps carry them into the playoffs, but Debasi is already injured, Boxall is aging, so I'm not really sure how things are going to end up with Minnesota United, but I'm not going to totally write them off like everyone else is that they're going to probably finish in the last two spots. Then next up in 9th place in our first playoff spot, it is Real Salt Lake. You might think this is a little bit low for Real Salt Lake, but at the end of the day, it's most likely going to be a playoff spot. And if we've learned year after year with Real Salt Lake, they love squeaky bumming themselves into the playoffs and making those deep runs and having those upsets in the MLS Cup playoff. So I gotta put them in 9th place. Then next up in 8th place might come as a surprise for a lot of you. It's the Seattle Sounders. Last year, this team didn't even make the playoffs and finished in 11th place. And I don't think things are gonna get that much better for them this year. I think they'll just make the playoffs, but I don't think they're the powerhouse team they once used to be in the Western Conference. There's a lot of players that probably shouldn't still be playing on the Seattle Sounders that they probably should have sold for more money, and they haven't made any new signings other than Hebert. This team is struggling for creativity. They need new offensive output, and the club just hasn't invested in the right players and sold the players that just need to go with this team. And to add the icing on the cake, I think Brian Schmetzer's tactics are quite stale. And to even add a cherry on top with the Seattle Sounders, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a dumpster fire moment within this team. I just have a feeling that there will be that one moment of implosion with this team, similarly to what we saw back in 2016. Next up in 7th place is the LA Galaxy. They had some big departures, losing Granciera and Araujo, but I still think they got that something to just make the playoffs, and I am excited to have a full season of Ricky Puig in the MLS. Let's see how this man cooks during this season. Then next up in 6th place is Austin FC. You all might think I have them fairly low in the standings for how well they were last year and how good their team is looking going into this season. This team should be a top 3 contender in the Western Conference, but this season compared to last season, they'll be playing in the CONCACAF Champions League. They've had a little bit of chopping and changing in the offensive lineup, losing Gite and bringing in Bruin, but just wait a couple of weeks once my CONCACAF Champions League preview is out, you'll maybe understand why I have them a little bit lower than everyone else is predicting. So stay tuned for that. Then next up in 5th place, which might be a bit of a bold prediction for a lot of you, is the Colorado Rapids. On paper, this team looks like a dumpster fire, but I feel Robin Fraser got the right pieces this team needed going into this season. I think the Colorado Rapids made a lot of underrated signings during the offseason. They didn't bring in any flashy new signings, but they brought in players that I think is going to fit the new system that they're going to deploy this season. Similar to 2021, I think this team's going to be more of a defensive unit. They're going to be more of a defensive first-minded team, and I think it's going to suit this group of players really well. Then next up in 4th place, I have the defending MLS Cup champions, LAFC. And y'all are probably thinking to yourselves, why did I put them so low as well? I think the loss of Chicho Arango is going to hurt this club a decent amount this season. And on top of that, I think their making a deep run in this year's CONCACAF Champions League. So finishing in 4th place and making a deep run and possibly winning the CONCACAF Champions League, you might see a little bit of slipping from this team in the regular season. Then next up in 3rd place is Sporting Kansas City. I know, the team that had a dumpster fire season last year, getting all the way to 3rd place this year. I think the losses of Alan Pulido and Gabi Kindo really hurt this team last year. But luckily, they're both back, ready to go, and those are massive improvements in itself for Sporting Kansas City. Heck, I mean, they're almost like new signings in itself for the team. And on top of all of that, at the end of last season, we saw a jump in form from Sporting Kansas City, and I feel Peter Vermes finally has got the system that he wants running with these players. Then in 2nd place, I have FC Dallas. FC Dallas is that type of team that loves finishing in a 1 to 4 spot in MLS, but then doesn't really do anything in the playoffs, and I think that's the same case for them again this year. Then for the number 1 spot in the Western Conference, it is the Portland Timbers. The Portland Timbers are probably one of the best teams during the offseason, bringing in big name superstars and selling the players that were just not good enough for their team. Them signing Brazilian superstar Evander is just gonna put this team at another level. Their midfield now is probably the best midfield in MLS, with Diego Chara, Eric Williamson, and Evander at the 10 spot. And to even have Paredes and Blanco as backups in those positions is crazy. But their biggest flaw, which makes me a little bit hesitant with this team, is the striker position, which it has been rumored that they're planning to bring in a TAM level signing in that spot, but as of the time of recording, they haven't done so. Now moving on to the Eastern Conference, in 15th place, I have the Chicago Fire. I mean, I think even Chicago Fire fans can admit this team's probably finishing in last place. The biggest bright spots for them last season were Slanina and Duran, both gone, no replacements. They are finishing in last place. Then moving on in 14th place, I have Charlotte FC, who still have a roster that reminds me of an expansion team. They haven't really bolstered their squad, and I just don't think they have the right players to make a playoff push. Then moving on in 13th place is DC United, who unlike Charlotte FC have a bunch of big name superstars, but I just don't think they gelled well together. It's just a bunch of random pieces. I don't think Wayne Rooney's ready for this job this year. I think maybe next season will be DC United's year to make the playoffs. Then in 12th place, I have CF Montreal. There's so much uncertainty going on with this team. They lost their head coach. They lost some of their star players. It's just not going to end well for this team. Then in 11th, I have Orlando City. They as well will be another team in the CONCACAF Champions League representing MLS, and I think they could possibly make a run in this year's tournament. In the first round, they do face off against Tigres, and a lot of bookies might put them as a one and done team to lose the Tigres in the first round, but maybe they have an upset against Tigres and make a decent run in the competition. And that's where I think it might be a little bit taxing on this team's fitness and with the group of players that they have, so that's why I have them in 11th. Then in 10th place, I have the New England Revolution, where offensively, I still feel like they have the firepower with Heel and Veroni, but I don't think their midfield and defense is quite up the par outside of Petkovic, who will probably be one of their shining lights in the defensive line. Then next up in 9th place for our first playoff team is the New York Red Bulls. This team loves being under the radar and just sneaking into the playoffs. They haven't made any massive signings, nor have they had any massive departures, so I think 9th place is quite perfect for this team. Then next up in 8th is Inter Miami, where this club made one of the deals of the offseason, bringing in Atlanta United striker Joseph Martinez. And I think Campagna and Martinez up top together might be one of the next best duos in MLS. Next up in 7th is Nashville. They're a team that kept their big name superstars Hani Mukhtar, Walker Zimmerman, and they still have that solid midfield and defense that they usually rely on, as they're more of a defensive team, to get them back in the playoffs in 7th place. Then in 6th place, I have FC Cincinnati, the team that has went under the radar during the offseason, being able to keep Luciano Acosta, Brenner, and Brandon Vasquez, who were 3 of the key players in last year's successful campaign for this team, making the playoffs, getting their first playoff win. And I think they might continue surprising more people this season and maybe finish higher than 6th place. But that's where I got them in this video. Then in 5th place, I have Atlanta United, the team that struggled so much last season with injury. They finally have their key defensive stars, Brad Guzan, Miles Robinson. They're back, and they're almost new signings in itself. And on top of all of that, brought in Celtic forward Giorgio Giamakis. I think Atlanta United might hit gold with this guy as their new striker. Then next up in 4th is NYCFC. This team season after season keeps losing their key players, but I still think they have the right core to finish in the top 4 in the Eastern Conference. Then in 3rd third place, I have Toronto FC. And do I really need to explain why I have them so high up? Lorenzo Insigne and Bernardeschi finally got their offseason in MLS, so it's going to be exciting to see how a full season of this Italian duo will do in this league. And on top of all of that, I feel Toronto FC have made the signings that Bob Bradley has wanted for this team. On paper, their defense, midfield, and offense look fantastic, and if they gelled well together with the coaching of Bob Bradley, the world is their oyster at that point. Then moving on to second place is the Columbus Crew. This team brought in probably my favorite coach in MLS right now, Wilfried Nancy. We saw how he brought out the best in every single one of his players last season with CF Montreal, and I think he's going to do the same with the Columbus Crew. Last season on paper, this Crew team looked really good and narrowly missed the playoffs, and I think Cucho Hernandez is going to have a field day now having a full season in MLS. And they've also made a couple of really good signings in bringing in Christian Ramirez and Jimmy Madronda. I really like the players they brought in, the team that they can put out on the field. There's a lot of creativity, there's a lot of goal scoring threats, and their coach Wilfried Nancy is the guy. Then moving on to first place is the Philadelphia Union. The Union were able to keep all their big name superstars from last season, and I just don't think the rest of the Eastern Conference is ready to compete with this team. Do I think this team can actually win an MLS Cup this year? Probably not, but they love finishing in first place in the Eastern Conference, so I wouldn't put them past it to do it yet again. But boys and girls, my opinion only matters so much. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. What are your guys' MLS predictions going into the 2023 season? Which one of my predictions do you agree with, disagree with? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to smash the like button on today's video, subscribe if you're not subscribed already, and I hope you'll have a lovely day.